I'm Kathy Magruder. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Clean Energy Center and happy that we are hosting this series. This afternoon's program is Master Energy Plan Design and Implementation for Facility Maintenance and Operation. We think this is an important topic, especially as federal funding will be coming through the pipeline to help support project implementation. So having a plan is a really good place to start. Corporate, government, and campus facility managers are designing and implementing these types of plans through proactive versus reactive strategic process. Our speakers today will talk about the elements of a good plan that identifies inefficiencies, allows for existing asset optimization, hedges against future energy risks, and reduces the carbon footprint for end users. This is our final program in the 8-part series, and it's been made possible by the sponsors listed on your screen. I'd like to quickly take a moment to highlight our voltage sponsors. BG&E has been a sponsor and a supporter of MCEC for a while. This year, we are also welcoming Schneider Electric, who is supporting this series for the first time. Siemens has been a longtime sponsor and has also been a longtime partner of MCEC and has brought us a speaker this afternoon. And finally, special thanks to our returning power sponsor, CohnReznick, an award-winning advisory assurance and tax firm with offices based in Bethesda, Maryland. And we are so pleased this afternoon to close the session with the moderator from CohnReznick, our dear friend, Anton Cohen, previous board member for the Maryland Clean Energy Center. He is the partner and renewable energy leader from CohnReznick. All of our speakers' bios are posted online so you can learn more about their capabilities. Anton, welcome and thank you for being here today. Thank you for your help with this program.
Thank you, Kathy, and sincerely appreciate everything MCEC has done. What a wonderful organization. You know, before we kick this off, just wanted to, each panelist here is going to spend some time going through a presentation, but we truly have a wonderful panel to get today. We've got Thomas Peterson, who's president and CEO of Center for Climate Strategies, also adjunct professor and lecturer at Johns Hopkins University. We have Sean Medevere, senior sustainability and decarbonization consultant with Siemens. We have Chris Ivanich, who is program director for energy as a service at Schneider Electric, and Tim Thurman, who is president and CEO from Performance Services. Before I turn it over to Tom to kick this off and go through his presentation, I just wanted to launch this with a couple more polling questions if we can just get to the next one. So, you know, we're trying to gather some information as to what the audience motivations are. So what are the primary motivations for you to consider undertaking a master energy plan for your organization? And so you can see here, I believe, looking at my you can select, I think you can select the top 3, Kathy, if I recall correctly here. So what are the primary motivations for you to consider undertaking a master energy plan for your organization? And I believe you can, please select the top 3. We'll just wait for that. This will help our panelists also get a feel for what topics are important to the audience. Okay, pretty. So we have a little bit of everything here. That is great. Resilience, cost savings, ESG. I was actually just on a panel now for ESG. A little bit of policy. Okay, thank you for that. So across the board. Let's move on to the second polling question here, and this is regarding at what stage are you in the process of developing a master energy and sustainability plan for your organization or facilities? At what stage are you in the process? And this is just please pick just one, and it'll obviously help us understand where you are in this in the master plans stage here. Okay, so we got most of the folks are, I would say, most of the folks are very early on here in the early planning or haven't begun. So this panel will be, I think, really helpful to many of you, and even those that are in the late planning stage. I think obviously all of you can benefit from what our panelists are going to cover. And then the last, I think we have one more here. What barriers are you facing to create and translate a plan to implementation? This is obviously, please pick one answer here. Okay. Limited funding, need more information, limited staff capacity, and limited financing. All good topics which we'll address today. So thank you for that. And now I want to just turn it over to our panel to introduce themselves, and we've asked each of them to do a short presentation. I think kicking us off here is Tom. So Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Anton, and greetings to everybody. And I'm going to kick it off by doing some big picture stuff on energy master planning. Next slide. Some punchlines here are going to be around the concepts and some of the techniques related to blended finance, implementation mechanisms, line item design and analysis, technologies and practices, and then operations and product lines. Particular case we're looking at here is actually going to be taking a look at an external facing financing case for product development. But these are all kind of touchstones of the planning process we want to scope out a little bit more today. Next slide. So the process itself is stepwise. It's logical and sequential. There are different renditions of this, but fundamentally, there's a sequential process that is required. It does, of course, require some capacities. There are time commitments, there are talent commitments that are involved in this, and there are technical steps as well as facilitative steps. We're going to touch on a couple of these as we go forward through our case. But just to call out some things that are of particular importance here, I think getting the goals established up front so there's a clear understanding of goals and objectives is really quite important, because everything is really going to flow down from there. And the second piece to call out, which we'll show a little bit more visually in a moment, is the concept of baselines, really understanding where you are already, and then in comparison to that, where you want to go. From there forward, it's a matter of becoming very specific sequentially about a series of things that need to happen. Next slide. So the concept on baselines here is that if we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, for instance, our problem is defined as an uphill climb in emissions. This is the top jaw of a crocodile. And we want to improve upon that by driving that line down, and that's the bottom jaw of the crocodile. And the actions we take through master energy planning or greenhouse gas planning or any form of planning is really all about how you close the jaws of that crocodile, how you identify, design, test, and implement the response actions that close the jaws for that particular problem. The trick is we have other problems that exist alongside this at the same time. When we work on climate change mitigation, for instance, we are always trying to close economic gaps as we close emissions gaps. So we're going to want to go through a process that enables us to identify and develop actions that do both of these at the same time. That puts us squarely in the arena of multi-objective management. Next slide. Just a reminder for energy planning, there are really two sides of the coin here, supply and demand, and some general strategies underneath each. But when we're looking at those response options for closing that crocodile's jaws to meet whatever goals and objectives we have, our arsenal of options includes things in both of these areas, and they're interactive. And there's a very well-established framework for these, and many, many examples and databases of technologies and practices that can potentially help close those gaps. Next slide. A call out here also is the value, if not the imperative, for collaboration. So as I think you guys are probably well aware, from a technical standpoint, expert work groups are more productive than individuals on a per capita basis. We use these work groups to address difficult problems. This could be related to innovation. It could be related to the resolution of conflict issues, but facilitative process and group decision-making can be extremely important in the planning process, and it can, and I believe should be designed really to harness the capacity of groups. Next slide. We're going to talk about a case that actually is in Ghana, but is generally relevant anywhere to demonstrate a couple of these points. And so this particular case was part of a project that we did on private investment mobilization. We did this in partnership with the United Nations Development Program in a couple different countries, but just to focus on Ghana and the context there, as I think many of you appreciate, plastics pollution is one of the world's greatest pollution problems. And while these pictures come from Ghana, they could be right in our own backyard. I mean, literally, we have these same problems here, whether it's the Chesapeake Bay or other watersheds where we have plastics deposition that's really at very, very high rates. The question is what to do about it and how. Context in Africa is that also, as the countries are trying to address this problem, the silver lining they want to achieve is economic growth and employment. You know, these kids in this picture here will be part of a cohort of young Africans that in less than 15 years will constitute more than 50% of the world's labor force. So they are very, very hungry for jobs, economic development, and product development and sales. And we'll show how this particular problem can be translated to those opportunities. Next slide. So our starting place here is the need to identify priorities in terms of technologies and practices that can be further developed and implemented through financing. And in this particular case, we started with a very, very long list. It was 180 different options in all of the different sectors. And the question mark we were trying to resolve through a screening and selection process involving a group of people from the public and private sector was where to be focused going next in terms of very specific activities. And we needed to pull a pilot out of this long list of 180, and we did it in a systematic fashion. And this gets to the issue of systematically screening and scoping options for technologies and practices using some set of criteria. In this case, this is a sheet off of the facilitative process that flagged a half a dozen, actually 7 criteria that were used to sweep through that list and then pin down the ones that looked like they were most attractive for investment going forward. In the pilot case we picked out of this systematic process, and again, this involved a group of people who had a lot of practitioner expertise as well as policy and financial expertise, was for waste management. Next slide. So literally what happened here is this option rose to the top as one that was a candidate for taking an action that is normally viewed just as a cost and through a cost center, but then turning into something that generates benefits in the form of revenues. So we move away from being just a cost-based approach to managing waste to doing a revenue-based approach, and doing that through the creation of new products that involve capitalizing on waste streams and converting them to sellable products. And in the process, generating revenues that attract investment. And if you do it right, that investment, because this is in the public good, because it is pollution reduction and economic and social development, can attract concessional or charitable sources of finance as well as commercial. And if you put the two together through blended finance, you may be able to finance something at a much broader scale than would otherwise have been possible. Next slide. Stan Day is with Stan Bank in Accra, and Stan was a part of this group and is at his job in his commercial bank has been managing commercial banking operations for a very long time, but he was asked about the time this process got started by his bank to develop a line of green products. green investment products, green financing products. So he came to the table here offering to help, but wanting to learn, really not knowing much about this issue we call low carbon development, and for that matter, energy planning. But Stan made some very important contributions. And right here, he's helping people understand that finance is available from a variety of sources, both public and private. And this blended finance process is tried and true for other issues where public policy and private interest intersect. And so it can be applied for clean energy and climate change. Next slide. And we get into the spaghetti side of this, which is going back to the diagram on converting an integrated waste management system from a cost to a revenue-based procedure, and looking at the full suite of functional expenses that need to be funded, and identifying the potential sources from those different categories Stan just went through that can be plugged in for this, and putting together something that is a comprehensive financing plan, if you will. Next steps. Next slide. What happens next is churning this into discounted cash flow analysis, kicking the tires in terms of what the rate of returns look like when you evaluate income and expenses of this newly formulated or reformulated program, and when you start adding financing from both commercial and concessional sources. So this is just one of the snaps that came out of the DCF analysis here that's set up to start looking at the role that financing will play in terms of achieving rates of return that are necessary to attract the scale of investment that's required for full implementation. Next step, next slide. And the punchline here is that because this particular approach is generating public benefits, pollution reduction, economic and social development, and at the same time generating revenues, then it's of interest to donors and members of the debt and equity community that are open to concessional forms of finance that don't require a full commercial rate of return. Once they get in the game, then the commercial providers of equity and debt jump in, because they're now able to enjoy the kind of rates of return that they need to for normal market return that justifies their activity in this area. So what we see here is a first set of snaps that are runs without that concessional financing, and then a second set of runs that shows what happens when concessional financing steps in and commercial financing follows. And literally you push the rates of return up, you push the payback period down, you reduce the risk, and suddenly this is a proposition that's attractive to a full suite of funders and can go into programmatic levels of investment. So the other thing just to note here, we did a prototype through this process for one particular facility. The scale up side of this is that there are 61 districts in in Ghana, and this prototype would be used, and in fact now is being used, to mobilize the investment at scale for all 61 based on this initial prototype. Next slide. And so this is one particular spoke of a much bigger wheel. You know, I mentioned that when we started this particular process that the nation of Ghana had 180 options on the table for their nationally determined contribution, their National Climate Action Plan, and we screened and selected one of them for further development. But that full suite of 180, or in the case of Maryland and Climate Solutions now, it would be a very long list of specific technologies and practices in every sector, would need to be developed in this fashion so that at the end of the day, and we're showing you a snap from a modeling process that we're running similarly for a set of issues actually in Brazil, but it would take this line by line analysis and design of every single one of these actions. In addition to going deep and producing the mechanisms and the impact analysis associated with each of them, it's putting them into scenario format so it can show the contribution literally that each of these choices have to that crocodile closing its jaws, and how together this entire system can achieve these overarching goals. You can imagine this being tailor-made to scale for a particular entity or a jurisdiction. Next slide. And I think that's it. Happy to talk further about this if you're interested.
Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate you walking through that example. Sean, turning it over to you next.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the time today. My name is Sean Mativier, and I work for Siemens, and I focus on energy and decarbonization strategies, both with our customers and internally for Siemens. I sit on our internal sustainability committee, and we have a zero carbon by 2030 goal. So we certainly appreciate and understand the challenges that this topic presents to the all you all as facility managers and planners and to the economy overall. And I would say, I've been with Siemens for a little over 14 years now, but my entire career has been focused on understanding this climate issue and how it translates to business activity and business improvement, and how can we intersect and align the two. And I would say for decarbonization planning, again, my area of focus really comes down to three main dynamics: understanding the climate issue, what it means to internal and external stakeholders, organizational commitments and objectives. And then the second bucket is understanding what are those pragmatic and actionable solutions that we can implement today that moves us closer to those goals, while at the same time reducing costs and improving resiliency, allowing us to manage and operate our business more effectively. And then the third piece is looking to the future, and this is critically important. Looking to long-term goals and commitments requires to have a sense of what is going to come in the future, what can we address down the road, how can we plan to address that in the future, and then also how can we align this future vision to goals and objectives that resonate with senior leadership and other internal and external stakeholders. Next slide, please. A little bit about Siemens. At Siemens, we have a deep portfolio of solutions that really directly address all these challenges of reducing costs, improving operational efficiency, and making decarbonization real. These topics and solutions focus on improving access to real-time, high-quality data, ensuring that buildings operate more intelligently and in a smart manner so that you can manage those buildings better and implement predictive maintenance and get ahead of problems before they become a reality. Looking to driving energy consumption out of the portfolio through energy efficiency and optimization initiatives, through on-site generation and storage and microgrid solutions with distributed energy solutions, and providing financing solutions to help enable these actions to move forward without exposing a lot of capital risk to our customers. We also provide clean energy sourcing solutions, again, to help organizations buy energy in a cleaner, smarter, more cost-effective, and manage those risks as well. And then certainly help our customers and the infrastructure overall improve grid resiliency, prepare for electrification, and again, move closer and closer to those decarbonization goals and objectives. Next slide, please. The challenges are not small. We recognize this. We understand this. We have built our planning and solutions around addressing these core challenges. The science is clear. Stakeholders are clear that this is the expectation that we need to reduce carbon emissions in this decade by 50%, achieve net zero carbon emissions by mid-century, vastly increase the amount of renewables on the systems, both utility scale and behind the meter distributed energy solutions. We need to address vehicle emissions. For many of you, that may include electrification. At Siemens, we have a large service fleet. This is certainly a big challenge and a component of our internal sustainability program and objective, and how to bring those electric vehicles and then the infrastructure and charging required to deploy those solutions in scale. And then certainly, carbon capture and reuse is an important component required. And then again, future view of net zero emissions alternatives, clean fuel, hydrogen, electrification. Some of these initiatives are not ready or ripe for every organization today, but planning for those in your portfolio down the road so that you look at end of life of assets and plan for your replacement plans and look to the future of what technologies are going to help you achieve those energy management, resiliency, and sustainability goals. Next slide, please. With those big societal challenges of increasing renewables, reducing carbon, certainly there have been a wide range of frameworks and external commitment programs that have stood up around this core objective. Now, these programs allow for some structures. They allow for some consistency from organization to organization, create some credibility of aligning your goals and targets to some of these institutions. Also creates some complexity, and it creates some rigor that needs to be addressed, that really requires some planning to ensure that your approach and practices are aligned to these commitments, aligned to the objectives, while also meeting your internal facility and operational and organizational needs and requirements. The carbon topic is not necessarily a small, simple one. Years ago, we would focus on natural gas fuel use, purchase electricity. This has certainly expanded. More organizations are expected to look at scope 3 emissions, which includes commuting, business practices, transport and development of goods, capital goods and products and services, and delivering those products and solutions to the marketplace. Understanding those upstream and downstream emissions is important, because a lot of these commitment programs are expecting and requiring that you have a comprehensive view of your carbon footprint. But also, when you look at the scope 3 emissions, many organizations are scope 3 emissions for other providers. They're scope 3 emissions for if they provide manufacturing product into the supply chain for those customers. So they're getting pressure from that angle as well to understand their emissions, because they are part of another organization's scope 3 emissions. So this creates a lot of complexity, but again, adds some rigor and structure to the planning process. Next slide, please. So what we have done to address these broad challenges, and our general recommendations overall, is to, again, begin with that comprehensive plan of attack that takes into account these climate goals, but also focuses on cost savings, resiliency, and funding and financing vehicles. It's important in the planning process, as Tom mentioned up front, to understand who are the key stakeholders, what's important to those stakeholders, what are the core objectives that we're moving towards. And then what we focus on are these 5 levers of decarbonization. Certainly, opportunities, prioritize and maximize opportunities to reduce energy consumption, optimize energy use across operations. Produce clean energy, ideally clean energy on site, to improve resiliency, grid independence, and then also, again, drive down emissions. Looking to the future, current and future, your transition to electrification. At Siemens, we've targeted our fleet initially for electrification. And then building in strategies to procure clean energy in a smart, economic manner that mitigates risk as best possible across the organization and provides a long-term decarbonization value going forward. And then filling the gaps, we typically look here at environmental instruments that can help address those called last mile emissions that are difficult to drive out of the business or can't be planned for. So overall, you're looking to establish a clear roadmap and plan, define opportunities to improve operational efficiency and reduce emissions within operations, and then establish some flexible carbon mitigation strategies through smart procurement activities. Next slide, please. I'd like to now take a pause and focus on a couple case studies that we've worked on where we've implemented these practices with customers. This is an example of a Mid-Atlantic university. Certainly resiliency, deferred maintenance, and infrastructure improvements were very important and critical to this customer. In addition, they were looking to, as a university, many of their stakeholders are looking to them to be a climate leader, both in the research space and also on the actions on campus through campus operations. So we have multi-phase process here for transforming this campus, focusing again first on those core elements of deferred maintenance, infrastructure improvement, building up the resiliency of the campus. then focused on energy efficiency and optimization and campus modernization practices to elevate the practices from forward to reduce emissions, reduce energy use, drive down costs. And then from there, implement a series of IoT and AI solutions to help the campus become more of a, operate more efficiently in an automated manner. Again, driving that predictive maintenance solutions, allow the campus team to, I certainly saw in the survey early in the webinar here that some of the folks highlighted the fact that, limited resources, staff resources is a big driver. Here's an area where improved automation and predictive maintenance and automating those processes can be very helpful. And then last step, certainly looking at decarbonization, looking at opportunities to generate on-site clean energy through solar practices, looking at the steam systems and delivery across the campus, looking for means to mitigate scope 1 emissions from those fossil fuels, looking to electrify campus fleet and also enable staff and students commuting to the campus to have charging solutions for electric vehicles, and then also looking at net zero building solutions and technologies into the future. Next slide, please. So how we translate all that good work that the energy engineers, distributed energy solutions providers within our team developed, that wish list of opportunities for the campus. We put this into a strategic decarbonization plan. This is a visual of one of the outcomes of that process, a glide path to look at where the campus is today from a baselining standpoint. Naturally, the campus expects to grow over time. So how can we predict that growth? And then plan to mitigate the baseline emissions and that projected growth over time. Again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, there was a series of energy efficiency initiatives that were recommended and implemented for the campus. Looked at on-site solar and continue to look at additional on-site clean energy generation opportunities. Establish a new base. Look at how the grid around the campus is going to become greener over time, so that we can plan for those emission reductions through a greener grid over time, and then create opportunities to source clean energy, generate more clean energy on site. And by mitigating through this plan, mitigating scope 1 emissions, campus can achieve about an 80% reduction against their 2019 baseline, putting them well on a pathway to align to a lot of the standards and commitments that I mentioned up front. You race to zero, second nature decarbonization planning, and so forth. So putting together all these opportunities into a clear plan and aligning this to the climate goals allows the organization to understand how we can improve resiliency, reduce costs, and then also make bold climate goals. Next slide, please. And here's another example, a New England hospital system. Again, here we focused more on microgrids and battery storage. This customer had goals and objectives around resiliency, obviously, for a hospital system, reducing costs. Environmental justice was very important to this particular customer, and then also meeting their long-term decarbonization goals. By aligning these strategies with some state-level policies in Connecticut, we're able to look for opportunities to help this customer generate clean energy on site and then provide some societal and community benefit direct to low-income households around where the hospitals operate. Next slide, please. So generally, when it comes to energy and decarbonization planning, the opportunities are clear. We typically know what needs to be done and implemented, but the challenges are still difficult to overcome. Mainly around overcoming those financial hurdles. How can we align appropriate financing solutions or funding to really drive the appropriate level of operational improvement and decarbonization objectives that we need to? How do we move from this, I call it this analysis paralysis? Should we wait for a couple more years for this technology to come down in cost or a new technology to emerge? And then, the last piece is, establishing that internal culture for change. How can we drive the organization to action. And having a clear strategy and a plan that takes into consideration stakeholder priorities, opportunities available today and into the future, and then putting that into a vision that can really translate and resonate with senior leadership really moves a long way, the organization along the way to getting to that culture of change. Thank you. I appreciate the time today. And I think that's my last slide.
Thank you so much, Sean. I think I'm going to turn it over to Chris now. I think obviously for many of you on the call, I think one of your big questions will be, and we'll try and cover some of this in the panel discussion, but how does this get financed? What financing options are there, and how does cost savings get analyzed here? So I'm gonna turn it over to Chris, and as you'll hear from each of the speakers today, everyone brings a very different perspective, a different part of the business of building a master plan. And I'm obviously looking at this from all different angles. You can see for many of you on the phone how this can be daunting. But hopefully after this, we can simplify some of the sort of key areas that you should be focused on. So Chris, turning it over to you.
All right, terrific. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris with Schneider Electric. I support our microgrid projects as well as the financing of those projects through Energy as a Service. Next. So I'd like to start talking about some big trends that we're seeing in the energy industry. Right, 2020 was a big year because of the pandemic, but 2019 was a really big year when it came to energy. Some things that we saw was that renewables hit grid parity, meaning that you can produce energy at the same price or a lower price than the electric grid using solar or wind. We also saw that the declining price of battery energy storage. The reason for that was that 2019 was the first year that we saw an electric vehicle in the top 10 most popular vehicles sold. Electric vehicles are driving the price of battery energy storage systems to continue to decline. And because of those as we're starting to see more and more deployments, the battery systems are decreasing. We also saw really interesting in 2019, natural gas was at a 20-year low, right? We've seen extreme volatility because of the disruptions in the supply chain over the last year. Some other things that we're seeing is that we've seen energy cost overall in the US have increased about 50% over the last decade. So very significant. We see just because of many different storms and the aging of the electrical system, we're starting to see more and more rate increases be passed through different public utility commissions, public service commissions. We also saw that power users, energy users are becoming more and more susceptible to power outages. We've seen that 35% of large businesses actually have a weekly energy disturbance. That's a big deal, right? So that means that you're not able to process. We've seen that our requirements for electrical energy has increased. We've seen that our quality of power that is needed has also increased, the type of quality that we need, and our ability now to be able to tolerate those disturbances. We're much more energy conscious now, right, on where we're getting our energy from and the reliability. We've also seen any large major corporation, any type of municipality we've seen, there's commitments to be sustainable. There are carbon neutrality goals, certain emissions, right? That's a big piece. And then finally, the last thing that we're seeing is there is a tremendous amount of third-party capital that is in this space. A lot of different agencies and banks and financing firms want to be able to deploy capital, own assets, monetize tax credits, and be able to own and operate these generation assets. So it's a really big deal, right? Everyone's used to the way that things are, and we really need to rethink our approach to energy. And that's where we've seen this new energy landscape developed. We've seen a tremendous amount of decarbonizing the power sector, right? That's reducing its carbon intensity. We're reducing the emissions from the electricity that we're generating. We're also seeing a decentralization of power, meaning we're moving away from those big, large power plants. And we're going to smaller generation plants that are closer to the load. If we go next slide. And what this has created, this has created something called the prosumer. right? So you think in the past, and most of us, as if you're a residential, electrical user, you're a consumer of energy, right? You get a monthly electrical bill, you consume that power. But those disruptions I talked about, they're coming really fast, right? We've seen the consumer internet go from really kind of a curiosity to a staple of everyday life, and that only took a decade. And these different transformations that we see are really leading towards a lot of disruptions and opportunities in the energy industry. So when we look at the prosumer, there's really three different elements that we look at. We see distributed generation, right, through microgrids. We've seen decentralized flexibility through battery energy storage systems. And we've seen decentralized data and control through artificial intelligence and machine learning. Next. You probably wonder, how is all of that accomplished, right? Well, that's a layered system of controls architecture. You're going to see these slides, so I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but these controls ensure that you're getting all of the benefits in this system to operate correctly. Next. And I talk about those benefits. The first big benefit that you're getting is reliability and resilience, right? You're getting better power quality. You're also being able to run if there is a disturbance from the grid. The second benefit that you're getting is cost certainty, right? You're going to be able to budget what is your future energy cost. You're not going to be hit by unknown rate increases. And those advanced controls, that layered controls I talked about, that allows you to make sure that you're automatically using the lowest form cost of energy at all times. And finally, a big benefit, sustainability, right? Your customers are asking you about what are you doing about being sustainability? How much carbon emissions do you use? And this is one way that you're able to lower those carbon emissions. Next. So there's different layers when we talk about the controls, and one of them is the actual microgrid controller. So this does the balancing of your generation and your loads. Next. I used to call this the building of the future. It's really the building of today, right? We have some type of renewable energy, we have EV charging, there's a building management system. And if you think about it, how do you ensure that you're using the lowest cost form of energy? Should you be using power that you produce locally? Should you be buying power from the grid? Should you sell power to the grid? What should your HVAC set points be? When should you be charging your electric vehicles? And that's what the economic optimization software does. Next. And what we show here is just how it manages your tariff, right? Your tariff is how much money you pay for energy and demand from the electric utility for certain times of the day, for certain seasons as well. Next. And we show some graphs here. This graph's just showing you're charging a battery when the cost of energy is low, and you're discharging the power when you're discharging the battery when the cost of energy is high. Kind of like what we try to do in the stock market, buy low, sell high. Next. And then finally, the one thing I've been asked for years, how do you make all this work together? And that's smart switchgear, right? All of those pieces I talked about, those different layers of controls, all that's built into this equipment that allows for that autonomous operation and that overall economic optimization. Next. We heard it before, and the part I'd reemphasize here is when you're building a microgrid project, the one thing you really need to do is get your stakeholders involved. Identify who needs to be part of that process, make sure they're aligned, make sure everyone's signed off, and then identify what's the goal? Why are we doing this? Are we doing it to save money? Are we doing it to get better power quality? Are we doing it for sustainability? It's probably all of those reasons, and you need to prioritize. Next. The last piece here is people always say, well, I'm not an expert when it comes to energy. I don't have the money, it's not in the budget. And that's what energy as a service is. It's a business model that allows for that third-party capital to own and operate those assets. So you're working with somebody who has a portfolio of assets, who has experience, they provide the capital. If you're a nonprofit, they're able to monetize those tax credits, pass those savings on to you. There's a tremendous amount of tax credits that are available. Next. And what's nice with energy as a service is that you're not spending money on developing the project and designing it. That's what the energy as a service provider does. And really, I think the best of all, they're the ones who are committed to operating that system and maintaining it. So many of the projects early on in my career I saw that talked about the systems were installed, but then there was no maintenance plan associated with it. That's where energy as a service, that system is going to be there for a long period of time. All right, next. And I'll hit on a couple case studies. Microgrids really fit every industry. One example here is a hospital. A hospital that's producing both electrical energy, thermal energy in the form of steam and hot water. They're able to lower their carbon emissions. They get price certainty, and they're able to improve the resilience. So if there's a power outage, the diesel generators kick on to power the emergency power system, and then the microgrid here still powers the rest of the facility. Next. Indoor farming, right? It's a huge market that's truly expanding here in the US. It's like a data center, very high energy intensity. And there's sometimes utilities don't have capacity to support these facilities. These people are very savvy in the indoor ag space, and they use microgrids as well. Very similar. They have electrical and thermal needs, just like a hospital. Next. And finally, one here that's close to home, in Montgomery County, Maryland. A really true innovator here was the county who looked at how do we get better cost certainty with our energy usage? How do we get some facility upgrades that are needed within the site that are decades old electrical infrastructure? And how do they make sure that they're ready for the future when there are outages, when they have expected growth, when they have EVs that get connected? Their microgrid that was paid for through energy as a service, where there was no upfront capital, allows them to accomplish all of those benefits. Next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And Chris brings up a really good point. When you look at the recent Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA bill, there were some key changes, especially when it came to too many, but two noteworthy ones. I think as people are looking at how to finance the implementation year, you got to do a deep dive into different technology that you're using, because there's a lot more credits out there than there used to be. And also the tax exempts, the nonprofits, they're now allowed to own the systems and the solar systems and claim sort of a refundable credit, a cash payment in lieu of an investment tax credit. So if any of your customers are tax exempts, this should go into the financing package, because now they can get 30% if they're going to be owning the system. So a great point made by Chris. And then the other thing that is new this year on the credit side is, for the first time ever, the credits are transferable. So now, which we're waiting to get some additional guidance, but it could open up some other exciting opportunities here as well. So thanks again, Chris. I appreciate it. And then obviously, Tim, turning it over to you, and then we can catch up on some panel discussions here.
Excellent. My name is Tim Thoman. I'm President and CEO of Performance Services. And so we offer kind of a broad range of services. So design build services, performance contracting, a lot of renewable in terms of wind and energy, or solar, of course, more solar now than previously. Smart cities, smart schools, smart campuses, so it's kind of, we offer this broad range of services, but what we really do is we kind of do this initial assessment to really uncover the needs, to determine which of those we would apply and would make the most sense for our customers and bring the most value. And so there are 3 case studies I'll just run you through, and I can answer any questions afterward. So next slide. So this first case study was Purdue University, Fort Wayne. And just kind of an overview of the project. It was about $3 million contract, $620,000 in energy savings, which was about 23% of their energy usage. Actual results were a little under $700,000 a year. It involved chilled water optimization for their campus, so only using the amount of water needed in each of the buildings. A complete upgrade and replacement of their HVAC control systems, heat recovery, so really taking advantage of the heat being that had been exhausted, demand ventilation, providing the proper ventilation where needed through kind of smart controls. Of course, lighting, retrofit, and occupancy control. The converted the campus building automation system to an open platform. So not only far better technology, but also open, such that they could, moving forward, pick best-in-class systems and have that flexibility. And then irrigation, water control. For some reason, they were not metering their irrigation, so they were paying sewer charges on all of the water that that they were using for irrigation. And so, next page. And so this is the so that's kind of the bottom line of what we did and the results. This was the process. So, and this was a little more kind of broader, perhaps, than some of our clients. All of our clients are institutional customers, so K-12 public schools, cities, counties, higher education, some healthcare. So that's kind of our market. So, we first go in and just kind of gain agreement on what the approach will be, what initially the customer thinks their goals and objectives are. And so we have somewhat of an idea of where we're headed, but then we really dig in and we work with stakeholders. In the case of this university, we really spent time not just with the facility folks, but also all the department heads to find out what their problems were as it related to the facilities. Concurrently, we of course analyzed the utilities and the campus energy distribution, analyzed all the facilities, all the equipment within the facilities, and then additionally looked at kind of their planned construction projects and their the projects and current initiatives, so that we could coordinate with those and make sure that no dollars were wasted, and also that whatever we offered aligned with their current initiatives. So after all that work, we come back and we update the goals and objectives, and we develop this energy master plan, and then we implement it. Part of it is communicating to all the stakeholders what's going to happen, and then implementing all the improvements, and then optimizing and verifying they're working, and then a long-term kind of monitoring program. And in most cases, also kind of an energy leadership or a behavioral piece as well. And so that was the process we used at Purdue. Next slide. So again, just a very holistic approach, coming in with lots of questions, not making assumptions, clarifying the project goals based on what they really want and need to accomplish. And then we also want to focus on improvements that they're actually going to implement and that will really drive financials. So this project, the guarantee was about a 5-year simple payback. It turned out better than that. But more importantly, it solved a lot of environmental problems that they had. And so this is just kind of a practical implementation of an energy master plan. Next page. So this project was Michigan City area schools. It was a little under a $9 million contract, and this particular project was a solar system and lighting. So we, at the time, I think it's still the case, it was the largest solar system that had been installed at a school in the state of Indiana. But as part of that, of course, we before we sized the solar system, we needed to estimate the impact of replacing the lighting with LED throughout. And but based on all of that, we recommended, and there are also site limitations in terms of which facilities could receive solar. But the bottom line was there was a we offset essentially 52% of their total electric bill and had a net savings of about $23 million over the life of the solar system. And so we were awarded in 2018 the Governor's Award for Environmental Excellence as a result of that project. Next slide. And so just some best practices. One is, again, come in with a comprehensive approach and make sure that you're thinking ahead in terms of all the improvements they'll do before you size the solar system. And the utilities are very, very difficult. In this case, we had to meet a certain deadline to qualify for net metering, which was a huge deal on the from an economic perspective. And so with all of the supply chain issues, that was probably one of the most difficult portions of the project. But if you're going to do a project, especially now with the current supply chain issues, we just strongly suggest that once you understand what you're going to do, really look at the long lead time items and be very thoughtful about which ones you need to order early to make it happen. And then also this ongoing, view it that, hey, it's a 30-year system. How are we going to take care of it? How are we going to maintain it over the next 30 years and build that into the cash flow, but also have a plan for it. So next slide. And the last project is the Little Rock School District in Arkansas. So we did not only an energy savings project there, but also an energy leadership, which is a behavioral program. So the HVAC systems were updated with the controls and, of course, boilers, chillers, LED. But the neat thing was we had guaranteed $885,000 a year in savings, and the actual results were $1.5 million a year. So this is a situation where and that represents, I think, 33% of their electric bill or utility bill overall, because there were gas savings as well. So that's a situation where we dramatically reduced the carbon footprint, but it was economically very favorable for them, and they were able actually to put more dollars into the classroom as a result of the project. So kind of this idea of not only being environmentally smart, but taking care of significant infrastructure problems, poor learning environments, and then also putting more dollars into in this case, the business, in this case, the classroom. So, and that we're finalists for the NAESCO Project of the Year this year, and so we'll find out here in a week or two if we won that with this project. Next slide. It was a significant challenge at this district because nothing had worked for so long. People were manually overriding everything. And so one of our biggest problems was getting people, convincing them to trust the system, to trust us, and that if they just let these new technologies do what they're supposed to do, that'll work. And through a lot of effort, that ended up being the case. Next slide. Well, I think that's it. So that's my the 3 case studies.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. And thank you all for your presentations. I mean, look, clearly the panel here has a ton of expertise and experience in this area. I want to maybe pose a few questions to the panelists, and any one of you can kick this off. But when you look at when these facilities managers are trying to implement their plan, I mean, this can be daunting, right? There's a ton that they need to do, right? How do they prioritize? What should they be doing first, right? And maybe not just what should they do first, but what are some of the elements of a good plan? Because this is a multi-phased approach, right? So for the audience here, how do you make them a little more comfortable here as to what the next steps would be for them?
Yep. So from my experience, go in and ask a lot of questions, gather a lot of data, show them all the options, but also understand what the real needs are, because a system that can save a lot of energy but doesn't solve other problems may not be the best solution. And so you really need to view it, the way we view it, I think, as we want to solve problems. Energy's a part of that, but there are other problems. And so, but give them a lot of choices with a lot of transparency, and then they can decide, what makes sense for them. Do they want a faster payback project? Do they want something that deals more with infrastructure issues? Do they want to get to net zero? What's their? But I think really just giving them the information so that they can they know their options, and then they can decide what makes sense.
Piggyback off of that just a little bit, that sometimes there's a tendency to focus on those easy to implement, low hanging fruit, quick payback initiatives. But to Tim's point, I think maybe where he was going to a degree was, once you take all those easy to implement, quick payback initiatives off the table, it's harder to then kind of bundle in additional measures, those infrastructure projects that may be more capital intensive, those bigger, deeper decarbonization initiatives, and have a good portfolio of projects or measures that pay back in a reasonable amount of time by bundling those low payback initiatives, quick payback initiatives with some longer, more challenging projects to fund. And that also helps along with the financing solutions as well, to put together a nice package of solutions and measures that can be bundled.
Anyone else want to add anything there before we move on to the next question? So, so during this process, there's a lot of folks to engage, right? You got the facilities, your C-suite leadership, stakeholders, vendors. Is there, how do you, is there one group, obviously you need to engage with all of them, but is there one group you should start with, or how do you navigate? Because everyone's going to have their own ideas, right, as far as how to do this. Is it starting with the customers? What are your thoughts there?
And I think it's also kind of tied to the first question about where do you start, and it comes from the leadership team. The leadership team is going to say, hey, these outages are killing us, right? We've been having 8 outages this year. Fix it, right? That's one spot. Or they're going to say, you know what, we're getting really pushed here on sustainability. We need to do something. What do we need to do to start lowering our carbon emissions? Let's set a baseline of where we're at, and then let's put a plan together to meet our carbon emissions reduction goals. So I think it's from that leadership team of what's hurting them, right? Where they have a vision, a roadmap of where they're taking the business, and I think it's all right. These are the priorities for the team and things to work on.
Yeah, Chris, I think we found the exact same thing, and that you start with the key decision makers, because if they don't want it to happen, it won't happen. But it's also important, what we found is that they appreciate if you really do the due diligence and you come back with something that their entire, all their leaders can get behind, even though they're directing, they really want support, up and down the organization. And they also, if there are major problems they weren't aware, they want to be aware of that. So, and I think to Sean's point, it is doing them a disservice if you only show them fast payback items, especially if they have great needs, and they almost always have great needs. They almost always have needs greater than the budget will allow, and so kind of maximizing that makes a lot of sense. But some clients are very financially driven, and they just won't tolerate a project that they'll tell us. So again, just keeping, I think, asking the questions and finding out what their criteria is, and then delivering on it.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll just step in one more time. So certainly senior leadership buy-in is critical to move anything forward, but it's also very important to have a stakeholder mapping exercise and understand what's material, what's important to all those different stakeholder groups. So for example, college campus, EV charging is a great solution for employees and students commuting. Deploying those EV charging, recently we had an experience with a university campus down in the south where there's a lot of concerns and questions around the equity of that, driving high expensive electric vehicles for certain components of the community and the preferred parking and whatnot. So having a good, clear vision across all those stakeholder groups on what are the right measures, what's important to leadership, but also how to deploy those solutions in a manner that makes sense, across all those stakeholders.
So we did get a question here. I know this might be a tough one to answer because each plan is going to be unique to the specific situation. But based on all of your experiences here in this area, how long does the average plan take to create, right? And I mean, this is, for the folks on this call, this is not a quick fix here, right? This is always evolving, right?
My experience is if it takes longer than kind of 6 months, you're at risk because the leader, the champion, may move on. Businesses are very dynamic, organizations are very dynamic. So you kind of have to strike when the iron's hot. So if there's someone who's motivated to make improvements, and the economics are good, whether it be low interest rates or whatever, time is not it can be a deal killer and an opportunity killer. And so I think faster is better. You want to be thorough, but I think speed is helpful.
There's also a time for an education to be done, right? Any of us, we just don't go out and buy a car. Great, I'll take that one. When we walk into a dealership, we know what make, what model, what features and functions we want, and have a pretty good idea of the price, right? And it's the same for anything that we're dealing with here when it comes to energy. You have to do your education and homework, before making a decision. So I think it depends on how far is someone along in that decision-making process.
And I think for all of you on the call, that education piece is something you build into all your proposals, right? I mean, it's got to be a big part of what you all do.
Absolutely.
It's events like these too, right? That help educate everyone.
Yeah, I think, and then I'm sure one of the burning questions for folks. We heard a little bit about energy as a service, but how are they going to fund or finance the implementation here, right? Just what options do they have? Because I'm sure there are many people on the call here are saying this is great, right? How do we do this? Where does the money come from? What can we do here? Any thoughts there? And I think there's probably a variety of different funding ideas and opportunities out there. It's a lot of folks don't have deep pockets. So is it grants? Is it we talk about energy as a service? Credits? What else?
Well, you have to state the obvious here, which is there's two huge pieces of federal legislation that provide a variety of funds and incentives. On the infrastructure side, it's a $1.2 trillion bill, and on the Inflation Reduction Act side, it's $369 billion specifically targeted to climate change. And there's a lot there on the energy and buildings and for that matter, transportation side. So there's in fact so much there that the general recommendation is to understand your priorities first, and then you go looking for sources of support. Otherwise, you can get lost in that enormous array in a big hurry. But the categories are pretty clear in terms of supporting things that have an emissions reduction benefit, any sort of energy innovation benefit, and then also a justice and workforce diversity benefit. And one of the notes just to make here, which I think everybody's probably aware of, is that the federal funding for infrastructure is requiring 40% be targeted to disadvantaged communities, either in terms of dollars or benefits. So, there's a need to do that. But what that does potentially is create a strategic opportunity for businesses that really want to think about the long term and the trends towards sustainability in the marketplace, and go ahead and take the bull by the horns and differentiate your products so that they are performing in a way that reduces emissions and addresses equity issues, and then not only are candidates for the federal funding, but attract social impact investors that are concerned about ESG, but it's a little bit more complex than that. They really want to see some measurables in terms of what you're doing to reduce emissions and improve equity. And I think this is beyond just a checkbox now, saying what we're doing is consistent. No, you've got to do some measurable stuff. And I think it raises a long-term issue for everybody in the industry, and that is whether you want to mainstream your monitoring and your management and your readiness around energy and environment so that you're constantly staying on top of your indicators for these areas to help you make shorter-term decisions. But that's certainly one area where you can think about for funding. And the federal funding is specifically set up so that it encourages diversification and blended financing, matching funds in particular. So the matching funds can come from sources that are traditional, but there's some non-traditional matching funds now because of the emphasis on equity that really are big candidates. And just reminder also, if you flip it over the Inflation Reduction Act side, we've got a very large pool, 369 billion of tax credits, more or less traditional, but with some more flexibility, but then the direct pay option, which gives more flexibility on some of them anyway, to bring money into the door. For all of those sets of funding, they include the potential for capacity support, to be able to build up the capacity for planning and assessment in organizations. And for the grant funding, the competitive grant funding in particular, those opportunities are set up to encourage partnerships in the public and private sector, partnerships at the community level. So this is a time for businesses to be looking outward and looking into the stakeholder community as a source of developmental support and partnership for new products, new lines, and new financing that's associated with it. So, I mean, I think really this is a time to think proactively, creatively, and strategically about the future, and not be just restricting thinking to conventional approaches, but thinking a little bit outside the box for all of that.
Yeah, I think, and Tom, and I'll let anyone else who want to chime in there, but you bring up a really good point. We're seeing with some of our clients, their dollars there, they just don't know how to access them, right? How they get filtered down from the Fed to the states, and do they qualify? What's the application process like? And I think, to your point, being proactive is key, because there are dollars out there, right, that can help you. So I appreciate you mentioning that. I think, Chris, were you going to say something? I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I think what you want to do is try to align all the incentives that there are, right? You look at what funding opportunities there are, both state, federal level. I would go after that. And then the next piece is, right, how do we want to pay for this? We want to do a CapEx, right? Can we put this in our budget and we pay for it and we deploy that capital? If you're a municipality, do you issue a bond? And then the other piece, right, energy as a service. This is where you engage the third party then who monetizes those tax credits, who goes through that process of figuring out what incentives are there, what can you go after, what qualifies, right? They take care of that piece. But then also that you're contracting then with somebody who is going to package all those pieces together, who's done this before, who's going to minimize any risk that you would have of trying to take that project on. But I see it as, align your incentives, see what there is, evaluate if you want to own it outright. There's a lot of people who do. And then it's do you try to, if you need the capital and you can't get it, do you issue a bond? Do you look through like an energy as a service provider?
And so, Tom, you brought up a good point. You chatted about ESG, and I'll give my thoughts as well in a little bit. But certainly what I've seen from a lot of the large private equity and infrastructure funds now, they're not, and a lot of big corporates, they're not investing in companies or making investments until they see some type of ESG strategy roadmap, right? And we'll get it. We can all get into what disclosures they are, and SEC or private or public, but it is becoming more important, to validate all that data, right? There's a lot of scrutiny out there on companies that are greenwashing or saying they're doing more than they actually are. So, I mean, for all of you on the panel, have you seen you look at ESG and the pressure that stakeholders and customers everyone are putting on businesses, have you seen a big pickup over the last few years in companies looking to implement these types of strategies?
Yeah, I would say for sure, and you hit upon some of those important ones, that a lot of it is driven by that investor pressure and preparing for more tied this emerging SEC rules. But I think related to that too, it's not just around measuring carbon and performance, but really integrating climate risk, physical and climate opportunities, and being, you know, open up to or excluded for certain markets, and positioning your business around posturing yourself to meet those challenges, and ensuring that you are aligned to that low carbon economy. And then also we do see a lot of pressure, like I said, from when I was speaking earlier, from supply chain pressures, customers who are supporting other you know, businesses who need to, you know, again, pressured by the same challenges for their own customers and investors to improve their overall positioning and look into their own supply chain, which causes this trickle-down effect of action throughout the economy.
It used to be a nice addition. Oh, if you can help me lower some carbon emissions, that'd be great. And now it's really pushed up as a priority.
So I think I'd add in full agreement is the not only financial institutions, but the stakeholder community are expecting businesses to approach these kinds of issues in more than just a hit and run manner. This is supposed to become, and it has with I think the more competitive cohorts, a core ongoing function. So instead of thinking in terms of an energy plan, gee, do we need to do one now? Haven't thought about that. Let's think about jumping in. Really, the first time that's done should be the beginning of a process that is updated periodically, but provides a platform for continuous management and continuous improvement along the way, and can be held out to those who are interested in partnering in whatever way with the organization as a core part of what it does. And it's also just a lot more efficient to structure operations that way than trying to, you know, fire up a planning process, you know, from scratch, shut it down, and then sort of think about doing it all over again at some point in the future. That all becomes a much more routine function when it's designed that way from the outset.
Yeah, Tim, were you going to add something there?
No, I mean, just yeah, I agree. I mean, there are so many opportunities in terms of all different funding vehicles, energy as a service, and then of course all the grants and the federal funding. I mean, this is just a great time to take care of those kinds of needs and address those kinds of priorities. But a lot of customers do need help from someone who specializes, I think, in these areas to figure out how, you know, which of these options can I really access, and then ideally they have a kind of multiple options, and they kind of with support figure out what makes the most sense.
Yeah, and I think Chris said it earlier. I mean, there is a lot of capital out there, right? Whether private, public, are we going to see more P3 deals with concessionaires here, right? Is that going to be a way to get these things financed? You know, the one good thing is, you know, with the IRA, we have a long runway here to see, and there will be new innovative strategies. The one thing I'm really excited about is, you know, as we all know, the additional incentives or credits that are provided to folks that are going to be developing in LMI communities, right, and rural communities, as well as energy communities. So, you know, you've got the benefit there of not just providing clean, affordable power to those communities, right? You also need clean, affordable housing, but you are going to be incentivized to really make a difference in those local communities, right? Whether you're creating workforce housing, job programs for those communities. So it is nice to see the intersection of the E and the S here, and we're seeing that from a lot of companies, that it's great to do the sustainability piece, but now you can also make a real impact in these disadvantaged communities. So I think that's an area I think, you know, many of us will be happy to be more involved in as we navigate through the IRA. Kathy, I know we've got about 4 or 5 minutes here. I wasn't sure if you had anything else that you wanted to add here, or any other final questions before we wrap this up.
I do, Anton, and thank you. And you're right on time. What a great conversation. For me, I think as we look ahead in encouraging communities and organizations to do master sustainability and energy planning, what's realistic to expect in terms of the plan development, in terms of cost? If we're looking for funding for these plans, are we thinking that the average plan for a campus is going to run a couple $100,000? It's going to be less than that? It's in the range? Give me a sort of thumbs up, thumbs down, hand this way if I'm on target. Is that something that's a realistic number so that we can go look for grant funds and budget for that type of effort?
Hey, Kathy, that's not really fair. Some of these folks may be more expensive than others here on the call. So, so.
No, so
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I'm trying to dial in the realistic, this is not an inexpensive effort.
Yes,
There's
right.
a lot of expertise that's involved. This is not just a thinking exercise, or from the sublime to the ridiculous is there's the thinking exercise on establishing goals and defining objectives, but then there's the engineering planning, which is a much more significant financial investment. And so you can do the front end of it, maybe not too expensively, or do that with an organization. But when you get to the engineering, you should understand that that's a bigger lift. Chris is nodding his head. I mean, I don't mean to put you all.
No, yeah. I mean, obviously it depends on the scope of work. How complex is it? How big is this? But you're right. I think there's always some type of conceptual design concept of how it would work. That typically is pretty straightforward. But then when you get into real engineering, putting drawing packages together, right? That's where cost is associated, right? There's a development cost that some firms will do at risk. But then the actual doing real engineering though, there's dollars associated with that.
So I just want to do a last minute comment before we go. Part of what the Maryland Clean Energy Center does and can do is provide access to consultants like our panelists who are here today, and we can provide technical support for you to retain their services. If that's something that your community or organization is interested in doing and you need help developing a request for proposals, that's something that we can do as a fee for service. We can also help with financing. MCEC does have the ability to issue taxable and tax-exempt bonds to finance projects. That's something we would be happy to talk to the audience about in regard to implementing a master energy and sustainability plan. And with that, I will thank our moderator for his expertise. I thank our panel for being with us today. You all have been very informative, very helpful. For our audience, as you exit the webinar, please take a moment to answer a couple of questions and share your feedback with MCEC to help us plan for future programs and educational content. As a reminder, the recordings from this series will be posted online at www.mdcleanenergy.org/speaker-series for viewing after the fact. We appreciate everyone joining us and invite you to save the date for the 2023 Maryland Clean Energy Center Legislative Reception on February 23rd in Annapolis. More details will be available soon. And that's a wrap. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.